Hello, welcome back to our family studies through the Gospel of John. We are here in John chapter 2, and I hope everybody had a great worship weekend. I know that many people had to worship online via online services. We hope that that went well for you, and I hope you learned some lessons from it. That worship doesn't end, even if you're not there at the building. And I hope you still were able to, maybe if it was just your own family or maybe some other families that have gotten together to help study. I just hope you had a great day of worship. And I hope that through all these things that are happening, we can rise above this as the church. We can learn to grow. We can learn to pray together. We can learn to do more things, maybe online together. This has really pushed me into these daily videos. And so in John chapter 2, I really want to kind of make this one 15 or 20 minutes. So we're just going to be looking at the first 11 verses of the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And one of the reasons why is because this is a very significant story in the Gospel of John. A lot of us, we come to this story, the wedding feast of Cana, and what we want to do is we want to try to pick apart, what Jesus actually did. Did he make the water into wine? Did he make it into grape juice? And that ends up being the focus of this story. And I'm not going to make that the focus of this devotional talk. What I want this to be is Jesus' first sign, because that's what John's going to call it. In John chapter 2 and verse 11, he says, this is the beginning of his signs. Now, John uses the word signs. Signs is different than the word miracle. He's not just looking at a miracle that proves who Jesus is, but this is a sign that everything around the miracle that's happening and the way John structures it is all pointing towards what's the number one cause of John's writing. I write these things so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah and that he is the Son of God. And if we come to this miracle and we just look at him turning water into wine and say, look, he's the Messiah, he's the Son of God, we've missed it. Because there are other prophets in the Old Testament who did miracles, Moses turned the entire Nile into blood, right, through the staff, through his staff. And so this wouldn't be all that significant. This wouldn't be all that great in separating Jesus from these other prophets. So what we want to try to do is we want to try to break this down a little bit, something that's tangible, meaning something that you can understand, and not get too deep with it. Once again, if I were doing a regular Bible class with this, we'd be spending a whole lot more time on this than these 15 or 20 minutes. But I want to get you to something to think about. In the very first verse, we get our hint. We get a clue at something here. On the third day. A lot of debate on what that can be, what that means. On the third day could be all the other signs that follow are things on this next day, and it's a 3-day cycle. But the third day is very significant for John in the sense of, not just John, but that Jesus rose on the third day. I don't want to make too much significance just if it said the third day, but we're also going to see something else here. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. And so there's the most significant statement. This is the first sign that's pointing to Jesus, that he is the Messiah, he is the Son of God. We have him doing something on the third day, which is just an interesting reference. I'm not going to make too much of a big deal about that. But Jesus will say, my hour has not come. And John uses this reference, his hour, or his time, as the day in which he would die. And on the third day was the day in which he rose. Okay, so I'm going to make a small significant statement. I'm not going to spend too much time trying to back it up, only because I want this to kind of remain. I just want this to be thought. You can say, you know what, I don't really see that, and that's fine, that's cool. I'm not going to make this a make it or break it thing. But here what we're going to see is the wine runs out. Okay, the wine runs out on the third day. Party over. Party's done. When the wine's out, everybody go home. Jesus, when everybody thinks the party is over, Jesus comes and fills, right? Everyone thinks the party is over. Jesus comes and fills the vases full of wine. And that's what Jesus did on the third day. Remember, look at the two men on the road to Emmaus, right? They thought the party was over. They thought Jesus, he died, he was dead. And it's his first sign, it's our first hint. So this word sign, this first sign is our hint, our clue. This is the peg sign. Why does John choose this as first? This is not the first miracle Jesus does, necessarily. This is his first sign that John is going to use, because remember, in a sense, he's already done a miracle in seeing Nathanael under the fig tree when he was actually never there. And so here, what we're seeing is this idea of there's going to come a time when people think the party's over, when it's over for Jesus and when it's over for his people, and Jesus says it's not over. That's just a hint. I want you to think about that. And when you're thinking about this in your family devotional life, there are a lot of times in life where things get us down. This coronavirus, right? End of the world stuff. Job loss, sickness, death, all those things. There are moments in our life where we think all is lost. The party's over. What's there worth living for anymore? And Jesus comes along and fills our buckets. He comes along and he fills our vases full. And that's what is so significant about this story. It's not the fact that Jesus turns water into wine. That's a small, significant part of this story. But it's what he does, when he does it, how he does it, everything that goes and is involved in this story. The fact that there is no wine is a huge significance in this theology, because in Isaiah chapter 25, in verse 26, I'm going to read that here for us for a minute. Isaiah 25 and verse 6, talking about the Messianic time, says, "The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all people on this mountain, a banquet of aged wine, choice pieces of marrow, and refined aged wine." And it goes on to talk about how this banquet, it's never going to end, right? It's this wine that just never kind of stops flowing. And so the time of the Messiah was going to be a time when Jesus was going to bring all this. There was going to be this party, this banquet, this feast, where people will be full. People will be filled. And this is a sign John is using to say that this is the generosity of Jesus' kingdom. This is speaking about the generosity of who Jesus is coming to be, what he's coming to do. He's coming to make that which is empty full. And sin has made everybody empty, has made everybody broken, has separated us from God, and he is coming to restore that. And so there's just one part thing to think about just in this story. Once again, so much we could be spending time on that we're just going to kind of glance over, but I want you to think about some of these things as you're reading. Now there were 6 stone water pots. Very interesting. First, the reason why they're stone water pots is because it passed over the Levitical thing that anything in stone could not be clean or unclean, which is interesting. That's why they would use stone, is because you couldn't call it unclean ever. Anything put in stone. Go back to Leviticus, and you'll find that. But there were 6 stone water pots. Six is kind of like this incomplete number of man. And then Jesus comes as the 7th. You're going to see this in the book of John over and over and over again. You have 6, Jesus is the 7th. The woman at the well, right? She was with a person now. She had 5 husbands before. Jesus is the 7th. This is the one you're looking for. Let me fill you. All these things are extremely significant in this. So there's 6 water stones set for Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. This is a whole lot of wine. And for the fact that it would run out is crazy. People, there's no way the person who prepared this feast would have ever thought those 6 jugs would have been empty by the time this feast was over. This, you over prepare for these kind of things. And there's what we're going to see here. There's going to be significance in the Jewish system, in the Jewish ways of things, and in Christianity. Nobody, especially Jews, ever thought the old law would become obsolete. The old law would be done away with. the old law would be something that no longer brought fulfillment, that no longer filled, that ran out in the sense of providing anything, providing what the Jewish world needed for them to live out their life with God. And that's the same thing. Jesus uses the old wine, the old wineskin and the new wineskin. The old one, when it's dried and done up, you can't put new wine in it. You can't put Jesus in the Old Testament. You have to put the Old Testament, right, into Jesus. Jesus fulfills it. He completes it. He, as Ephesians 2 uses the word kairios, he makes it useless, null and void, meaning there's no longer a sacrifice there. All that was doing was just preparing for Jesus, and when Jesus came, all those things were done. It's not to say the Old Testament's useless in the sense of learning from it and understanding from it. It gives us the storyline. I mean, it's our story as Christians just as much as it is the Jewish story. I don't want to minimize that. But if you just try to live your life under God, just under the old system, right? Just under the law of Moses, just using the Ten Commandments, just using the law of the Levitical law, the priesthood law, all those kind of things, you will find yourself empty. As the Hebrew writer would put it in Hebrews chapter 10, there no longer remains a sacrifice there because Jesus is a better sacrifice. There's no longer Moses because Jesus is a better Moses. No longer a priest. Jesus is a better priest. No longer a temple. Jesus is a better temple. All those kind of things that the Hebrew writer really picks up on and says that Jesus is better at. And these are what these signs in John is doing. And not only is a wedding very significant because of what Jesus is doing, but a wedding itself is significant in that John's going to pick up on at least 4 major Jewish festivals. And Jesus is going to complete it or fulfill it or make them better. The next one's going to be Passover, which is significant. We're going to talk about tomorrow. But Jesus said, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up and to the brim. Water is extremely important in the book of John. Water represents eternal life. Samaritan woman, John chapter 7, later in John, water is going to be very symbolic in the sense of this is what life is. You drink from me, drink from my water, right? If you knew who I was, talking to the Samaritan woman, if you knew who I was, you would be asking water from me because I can give you water that you will never thirst again. And don't miss those connections between this sign and a later sign, that when Jesus filled these water pots, they will never need to be filled again. You're kind of taken back to the stories of like Elijah and Elisha, the widows who had cups of oil or cups of powder that never ran out. They just kept making bread and kept making bread. And they never, as long as they trusted and had faith in God, it never ran out. And that's what Jesus provides us. He provides us with peace and joy and love and kindness and generosity that never runs out. You cannot run out of the grace of God. You can walk away from it. You cannot drink from it, right? You can make it void in your life because you won't partake in it. But Jesus is always there when we are empty to fill us. And he said to them, draw some out now, take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves the good wine first. And when people have drunk freely, then serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Extremely significant. First of all, for them to have 6 water pots and that many gallons, this was a rich person who put this wedding on. He would have had access to the best wine. And what Jesus makes is better. No matter what you can get out of the old Jewish system, Jesus is bringing something better. He's bringing, as John would say, Moses brought truth. Jesus brings grace and truth. Remember we talked about that? Moses could not see the face of God. Now we can see through Jesus, God, face to face. We could not see the glory of God. Now looking to Jesus, we can see his glory. The Old Testament didn't have the fullness of grace, the sacrifice of Jesus, the Messiah come. Now we have that. So many better promises. We have fulfillment of promises that God had made so long ago. The Hebrew writer talks about all these great men of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. They did all these things without having received the promise. We have received it. How much better, right? Since we have a better fulfillment, we have something better filling up our lives, should we not to live better and more. And so this good wine, this new wine, people spend too much time. Oh, is this grape juice? Is this wine? Is Jesus making drunk people already drunk? It didn't necessarily mean everybody's drunk. It didn't mean everybody was walking around tipsy and Jesus made them more tipsy or more drunk. That if we start getting into those debates, into this, we're missing why John wrote this miracle. And then in verse 11, and this is kind of where we'll finish. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. Something happened here where Jesus manifested his glory. It's awesome. This is more than him just being a miracle worker or a prophet. This is him proving that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, coming to fill our lives, to fill the world with his grace and truth and mercy and love. As a family, I hope you guys can really spend the time to think about how has Jesus filled you guys? How is his grace and mercy and truth continuing to affect your family, your loved ones, your relationships, so that you may continue to grow in his love, to grow in his grace, to become more and more filled in your lives to the point where you overflow. Love you. God bless.